Perek Chavdalad Mishnah Gimel. This Mishnah continues the discussion of how to feed an animal on Shabbos, the permitted and non-permitted ways of feeding animals on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah, Ein oivsin es hagomel. You're not allowed to force feed, to stuff food into the mouth of a camel, velo darsin, and nor are you allowed to sort of cram it in. What is the difference? Well, both oivsin and darsin mean that you actually take the food and you force it, literally you put your hand into the mouth of the camel and you force it down its throat beyond the point where it can bring it back up again. And oivsin is generally for a larger amount of food, and darsin, says the Bartanura, is a smaller amount of food, but both the principle is the same. That you're not allowed to force feed the animal, the camel, either with large or smaller quantities of food. Avol malitin, what you can do is malitin, which means you just put the food in the mouth of the animal. Now, of course, if the animal wants to eat itself, there's no problem. We just, for some reason, the gomel is not eating, or you want to facilitate and help its eating, all you can do on Shabbos is malitin, which means just to put the food in its mouth, but into a place where it can sort of bring it out or spit it out again. But you're not allowed to put it so far down that the animal cannot bring it back up. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, that was the practice in those days. When a camel would go on a long journey, you would sort of feed it up so that it wouldn't need to eat for a number of days. And the Lashon of Oivsin is from the Lashon of Avus, which is like a storehouse, that you're making the inside of the gomel of the animal into some sort of storehouse by packing the food in. So ein Oivsin es hagomel v'lo darsin, you can't do that either with a large quantity or a smaller quantity, avol malitin, but you can put the food in its mouth. Similarly, the ein mamrim es hagolim, you're not allowed to force feed agolim, calves, young cows, avol malitin, but you can take the food and put it in their mouth. The practice, says the Gemara, the Brisa tells us in the Gemara, that what they used to do was to sort of turn the animal over and lie the animal down and then simultaneously put water and food into the mouth of the animal, and that would sort of fatten it up. You cannot do that, but malitin, says the Gemara, would mean that you could do either water at one time or food on another time, but not simultaneously. That's how the Brisa of the Gemara understands it. But the Mefarshei Mishnah explain it means that you can't force feed the egel, the calf, by putting the food so far down that it cannot bring it up again. But you can do malitin, which again means just putting it into the mouth, not so far down. Continues the Mishnah, umahalkatin letarnugoylin. You're allowed also to put foods into the mouth of the tarnugoylin, similar to the mamrim eshagot, sorry, to the malitin we had above. So you can put the food into the mouth of the chicken itself. V'noisnin mayim lemurson. You're allowed to add water to the bran. Avaloi govlin, but you can't knead it together, because that's a problem of losh, of lisha, which is kneading, which is an issa malacha on Shabbos. Now, there's a machlokus when it comes to govlin, whether this is an issa d'oraisa or d'rabanan. In other words, if you were to take water and bran and knead it and mix it together, is that an issa d'oraisa or d'rabanan of lisha? The Rambam learns that it's only an issa d'rabanan. Why? Because lisha, min haTorah, would only be for substances which sort of adhere together. For example, you take water and you add it to flour to make a dough, that sort of sticks together. Masha'en kain, bran, and if you add water, these sort of substances don't stick together, and therefore it's only d'rabanan. That's why the Mishnah says, noisnim mayim lemurson. That's why we're allowed to actually take water and pour it onto the bran, because even if you were to come to knead it together, that would only be a d'rabanan. Those many Rishonim learn that actually kneading bran and water together is an issa d'oraisa. However, the reason why we're allowed to noisnim mayim lemurson, we're allowed to add water to the bran without actually kneading it, because merely adding water to the bran would only be a d'rabanan, and in order to feed livestock, to add water to this bran, the Rabbanan weren't makbid and weren't geyser, and they allowed you to add water to the bran. Okay, continues the Mishnah. You're not allowed to place water, to put water in front of bees, or in front of doves, in the dovecot. Why not? So the Bartanura explains, because she'ein mezonosehen olav, because they're not dependent on you for water. They could go and elsewhere, they could fly around and go and find water elsewhere. And since ein mezonosehen olav, since they're not dependent on you for food, it would be a tirchi yaseira for you to supply the food and to supply the water. So therefore, it would not be allowed to place water in front of devorin or in front of yonim, in front of doves. However, continues the Mishnah, it would be allowed to place water in front of avozim, geese, v'tarnagolim, or chickens, v'lifnei yonei hardasius, or in front of doves, which are called yonei hardasius, Herodian doves. The Bartanura tells us they're named after the king Herod, al shem Hurdus HaMelech. They're named after Hurdus HaMelech, shahoy megadol mehen barmona, because he would raise doves in his palace, so therefore they're called after Herod. But the reason is, again, says the Bartanura, you're allowed to put water in front of the avozim and tanagolim. Why? It says the Bartanura, yonim shegdelim bebatem. You're allowed to put that in front of the animals. Why? Because they're not going to fly away. And therefore they are mezonosehen, their food would be incumbent on you. They are dependent on you for food. And therefore it would be allowed to place it in front of them. So really what the principle that emerges from this Mishnah is twofold. Number one, you cannot do a tirchi yaseira to force feed the animal, but just to place it on their mouth would be mutter. And number two, you can only provide water, to put out water for animals who are dependent on you for their food. But if the animal is ein mezonosehen olav, they're not dependent on you, then it would be also to do it. And of course this is an important makar for the discussion regarding putting out food, this practice of putting out food on Shabbos Shira. There is a tradition which has raised a lot of halachic objection, that one puts out food, one puts out bread for birds on Shabbos Shira, and it has a makar. The reason is that either because the birds would sort of sing Shira as we cross through the Yam Suf, as the Bnei Yisrael crossed through the Yam Suf, they sang Shira. And to recognize the fact that they sang Shira, we sort of reward them by putting out bread or some sort of food. Alternatively, another reason is that Dosan Naviram, when they heard that Moshe Rabbeinu said that there's no mon is going to fall on Shabbos, they quickly went in the middle of the night and they put out mon, and they wanted to make Moshe Rabbeinu appear as a liar. Therefore, the birds came along, they ate up all the mon that Dosan Naviram had put out, and therefore saved the reputation of Moshe Rabbeinu. So to reward them, we put out the bread. The difficulty is, of course, this Mishnah, because this Mishnah tells us that an animal whose food is not your responsibility, ein mezonosehen olav, you shouldn't be putting out food for them. So how could we do it? So this gives rise to a lot of discussions. I noticed the art scroll, he quotes the Olas Shabbos, who says that perhaps the answer is this, that the whole restriction of feeding wild birds, whose responsibility of feeding is not your responsibility, is only with respect to water, because they could go for a fly away and they could go to ponds and rivers and find water sources elsewhere. But food, which may not be that accessible, they may struggle, that would be allowed to be given to them. That's how he answers. But this is a big topic and has given rise to much literature and discussion, no doubt, over the years. That is the end of Mishnah Gimel.